Welcome everyone to day 2 of Web Lab. Uh, so for today, we're gonna go a little bit more into. We'll talk about ideation today, and then later on, Justin is gonna go over JavaScript and DOM manipulation, and we'll do a workshop as well. If you have any questions, there's a questions doc, and then there's also the help queue. When you join, if you want to join the help queue, make sure you join a breakout room first. And then when you add yourself to the queue, tell us what breakout room you're in. If you say something like, oh, I have like a red shirt in my profile picture, it's really hard for staff to go through like 200 something Zoom profiles. So it just makes it easier for us. If you have any questions on that, just reach out to us. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about ideation. And just a reminder that milestone 0 is due tomorrow. That's kind of when you have to submit your 10 ideas that you want to work on. And be due tomorrow at midnight. So let me just get this set up here. Okay. There we go. So what exactly is ideation? So ideation is pretty much the process that we're going to go about for brainstorming and developing our web apps. And so when we're trying to think about like what is our end goal, at the end of the 4 weeks, right, you want to have a deployable app. And so we call these viable products, or your web apps, consider them products. And our end goal is basically to right now start brainstorming on how you are going to move from a concept or an idea to something that's that you can build and that is deployable. And just one thing to keep in mind is that if you don't have your exact idea right now for your web app, that's totally fine. If you're still debating between, a couple ideas, have no idea what you're going to do, if you're still forming a team, that's totally okay. The next 20 to 30 minutes is really just to help us or help you approach one way of coming up with some ideas for your web apps. So one idea that we use in this class and that we'd recommend, it's pretty common in any type of design, is kind of this idea of a 3-step workflow where you kind of start big and you're coming up with all these big ideas, and kind of diverging from all of them. And then, you start talking and developing them, and then slowly you want to converge into something a little bit narrower and more in scope with the class, right? We only have 4 weeks, so you can't really build everything and anything that you want because we have a time constraint. But you might be able to have some flexibility in kind of what ideas you want to do. So as you start to narrow ideas, you might be saying, hey, what if we build on to that? And so you might diverge a little bit more. And so the end goal is really kind of like this wave that you want to eventually converge into like your solid idea. And we'll kind of talk about like what you do in each step. And so the first step in this ideation process is really just to come up with any idea, any and everything, right? There's really no rules in this step of the process. Your goal is really just to, if you come up with an idea, you can bounce it off a teammate, off a staff member. It can be really any idea, something really small, something really big. It might just be a feature. Maybe you're saying, I just only want to include, I want to include feature X. I don't know how I'm going to integrate into my entire app, but I think it'd be really cool if we had this feature. Or you might have an idea that's like, I want to go help address an issue related to this concept, right? And so that's kind of where we're at. So this diagram here is from the 2009 slides. And so on one axis, it's really about the order at which the idea was created or mentioned or brought up, right? And then on the other axis, they kind of rank the ideas from best to worst, right? And really what this is showing is that any idea can come at any point in time, right? It can be an idea that it's maybe your first idea that you're walking into the class, you have a really solid idea. You're still gonna try to brainstorm something else, but you think this idea is really good and you're passionate about it and very interested in moving forward with it. Or it could be something that like, I'm just gonna say this one concept or this one idea. And my team member might say, hey, I like that too. What if we build upon that and expand it to this, right? And so slowly you're starting to piggyback among your teammates, right? So really there's, don't feel constrained in terms of in this step of the ideation process of when you're coming up with ideas. Any good idea can come at any time. And so going along with this step in the ideation process, really there's no rules on like, what you can do. You should be creating a lot of rough ideas, right? They don't have to be the most perfect ideas. They don't have to be the next big social media app. Really, you're just in this development process. And so sometimes it's really hard to come up with brand new ideas, right? It's really hard to be creative, and some people might be very creative and be able to come up with brand new ideas on the spot, and others, they might need inspiration from certain sources. So we'll kind of walk through on like, what is the practice example. Um, but think about Chipotle, right? So you've all heard of Chipotle. It's just you walk into a restaurant and they make your food for you. You tell them what you want, whether it's a burrito or a bowl or whatever. They make it for you. You tell them what fixings you want, and then you pay for it, right? Pretty interesting, unique idea for a business, right? But then, like, for those of you who've been near campus, Saloniki Greek is this Greek restaurant right at the edge of campus. Um, and that's a very similar version of Chipotle. It's pretty much Chipotle, but Greek food, right? And then there's Whole Heart Provisions, which is pretty much Chipotle, but a healthier version, right? And what is Chipotle? Chipotle is pretty much just a Subway, but in the form of Mexican food, right? So what we notice is that all of these ideas really stem from or all of these businesses stem from the same idea, but they're just different variations of it, right? And so this is what we're talking about, where you don't have to, come up with the next big idea. Sometimes it's just a good idea can be a variant of a pre-existing idea. And so another way to approach creativity is, let's say you're asked this question, right? I've been asked to plant 4 trees equidistant from each other. This is also from the 2009 slides. And so you might think, oh, I'll just plant them in a square, 4 trees and at each corner, right? But one thing to think about is, what if you just build up, right? Put it on a hill, right? This is just another way of thinking outside the box, thinking creatively, and seeing, what are some alternatives to do. So how exactly do we move forward, right? So if you were here with us yesterday, we had the theme reveal, and this year's theme is Tag Yourself. So we're just going to do a little idea map walkthrough on. It's not something you have to do, but it's just an idea, one method of approaching for brainstorming. So when we're talking about Tag Yourself, right? First, we want to think about what problems are there that we might be able to address. So let's say you have a lot of like wedding pictures or dinner pictures, and can you tag all the people in a group photo, right? Or let's say you have a pet, right? And can you share that you have found a missing pet using their dog, and how would you share or communicate that information, right? And so we're using tags right now, like in different forms, right? You don't have to stick to the theme. The theme is actually very much open-ended. You can ignore it, or you should try to like find some way to connect it to the theme, but it doesn't have to be a literal interpretation of the theme. But this is just one example that we're going through. So kind of when we, in our idea map, we can start thinking about like photo sharing, right? You can collect photos from a bunch of attendees at like group events, like weddings or birthdays or dinners. Everyone's taking pictures, right? But can you centralize that, right? Or if you want to take it in the approach of like dog tags, right? You're walking your neighborhood dogs or pets, or taking care of them, right? Like something around that idea. So that's kind of like this first step of this ideation process. And the next one is we go into the audience, right? Like who's our target audience, or who would use it, right? So let's say we go the pet route, right? There might be pet owners who are interested, teenagers who, teenagers, who walk their pets, anyone who's in love with pets, former Club Penguin members, pretty much anything and everything is open. And so if you can identify your audience, this can kind of help you drive like what would be really important to them when you're thinking about building your app, right? If you kind of miss that part, you might be start building a feature, but you're like, who would use it if we're trying to adjust something related to pets, right? Or if we're trying to talk about photo sharing. So making sure you have the audience there is key. And so, if we're going off event planners or photographers or friends and family might want to upload photos, right? Finding a centralized way to do that. Or if you're going pet owners, dog walkers, people who would be in that space as well. So that's the first two part. Next, you kind of want to think about, what features do you want in your website, right? Do you want to report missing pets, or do you want to kind of create a virtual pet park for pet owners to take their pets, right? If you don't really want to go outside, you can create a virtual park. So this is kind of when you can start to become a little bit creative, but this ideation process really helps you kind of like centralize and kind of bring together like what you're trying to build in an idea, right? So now that we're talking about our features, you can report a missing dog in a neighborhood, or you can create a feed of like dog tags, maybe like at a local park. And if a pet is seen at a park, you can post the pet with a picture of their tags, or something like that, right? So that's kind of one way to approach it. Um, and then the last part is the theme, right? So we were talking about the theme earlier, which is tag yourself. It doesn't have to be a literal interpretation. This example is just more to help you out. Last year's theme was craft your own blank. The year before was press any key to start. So these are really kind of more abstract themes that kind of just help you be inspired and approach your product in a unique and creative way. And so one thing we might add is like a gamification, right? For locating a missing dog, you get points, or creating like virtual pets with custom dog tags, right? So that's kind of how we're bringing in like tag yourself. You can tag a dog or tag a missing pet or something like that. And so all of this really helps us, right? But this is just like an idea map. Eventually, we want to start to, move this into a product, right? That's our end goal, right? So it might help to create a mood board. So you can have a mood board of just corgi dogs to help you out. But you can also have just, a more helpful mood board, right? You have dog tags, Animal Crossing, people walking their dogs, a dog park, things like that, right? And this is just like a nice little, thank you, Shannon. It's just a nice little way to get a little bit more inspired. And remember, we are still in the first part of our ideation process, right? So something that's really important in this step, especially when you're working with your teammates, is that you cannot judge. Where you're not really trying to think of implementation or details yet. You're still kind of thinking like, what are just some ideas, right? We're in that diverge step where we're coming up with any idea that you think might work, right? And so this might help you when you're working with your teammates to start thinking of ideas, right? And I'll just add this, right? If there's something that like you think is really cool, but you're like, I have no idea how to code this, or I have no idea how to build this in a website, don't let that be a limiting factor, because often there might be a pre-existing like library, and we'll be when you're building your project, you'll be writing it in React. So there might already be a pre-existing library that exists, or B, you can just ask one of the staff members, and the staff members can help you bounce ideas and say, hey, like that might work. And if you want to make it easier, you can look into this library, and that might help you. And so that way, right now, if you do want to do that little check of like saying, can we actually do this in 4 weeks? And you're not really sure if you can, the staff is here just to help you out. So that's kind of like the first part right now. We're going to test something right now as a class. We have 269 people. So go to this link. We're going to see if this works. So weblab.2/ideate. We've only tested the site with like the staff. So now we're doing it with 200 people. So if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So just submit an idea and you should see them come up, and play tag. Oh, wow. There's a lot of ideas coming in. Tag. So if you have any idea, just take 30 seconds that you might doesn't somewhere around the theme of tag yourself, doesn't have to be literal. We're not saving these as just more just to see what the class is thinking about. What is buffet line of food where you tag? Oh, it's going too fast. Tag yourself is new. It's a game. HTML tag. We were actually talking about that as a staff. If you can do something with an HTML tag, that would be funny. Gather.town. Nice. Cool. Yeah. So it's just a nice little exercise just to think about. Um, there's a lot going on. Clothing tags, a lot of Tinder ideas, which is interesting. More Tinder hashtags. Alrighty. So why don't we go back to the slides? So yeah, so this is just kind of like the first step that we're talking about in ideation. Um, and yeah, and so now that you've kind of started brainstorming your ideas, now we kind of want to start on, converging and narrowing down into a more specific scope for your web apps, right? And now you kind of want to start asking the questions for your ideas, like, is this something that excites you? Can this be done in a web app? Has this idea been done before, right? If it's been done before, is there something that you can add onto it that will make it unique and intriguing and exciting, right? So these are just something to think about. It doesn't really have to be, um, you know, this isn't like a rubric or make or break, but these are just more questions you want to think about when you're starting to kind of narrow down the scope. And it really is like, is this something you want to be building for the next 4 weeks? You kind of want to think about when you're looking at your ideas, which ones did you like? But if you like all of them, it might also be helpful to see which ones did you not like, right? If you look at it from the other lens, that might help you understand which ones you want to take out. And that might be a better way of approaching it if you just have a bunch of ideas that you like. And just for when you're actually building your apps, just something that we as a staff see a lot are like free food finders or discover blank on a map, or matchmaking apps or course planners, right? And Capbook. Please do not rebuild Capbook for your project. But yeah, there's just something to give you an idea, right? If you aren't sure about an idea, or you have certain questions about it, definitely feel free to reach out to the staff. And I guess one thing that's a little bit more interesting and exciting for your class is that, all of you have done virtual learning for the past, almost year. And that might be a good motivating factor. It's like, is there something that you wish you had, whether it was for academics or for connecting with friends or maintaining relationships, that you think you could build in a web app? And that might be something that will inspire you. So that is the second step of our ideation flow. And then the last step is, now we're trying to transform these ideas, right? At the beginning, we introduced this concept of moving these ideas into viable products, right? And that's what, your deployed site at the end of these 4 weeks is a viable product. And so what we want to do in this step is we want to start basically focusing on the concepts and features for our web apps, right? If you think about like the big web social media apps of today, like Facebook or Twitter, right? When they were first launched, they were nothing like what they are today, right? Facebook was pretty much just a profile where you would connect with other college students, right? They didn't have gaming. They didn't really have, pages or groups or a lot of the features that, are developed today, right? Same thing with Twitter, right? It was pretty much just a feed where you just had a profile and you could just send a quick little blurb, right, on what you were doing, what was your status, right? And since then they've developed, right? And the point of this is really saying that you don't need to have the most polished and perfect app today, right? Web design and just project design and any form of design is an iterative process, right? And so, throughout the next 4 weeks, you can come up with an idea. And if you like it, that's great. And, as you're working with your team, if you say, hey, this is kind of going off track, you can continue to iterate on it. And so when you're trying to transform these ideas into concrete websites, first you want to ask, can you sum up this idea into like a sentence, right? If you have all these features, right, and all these concepts, you want them to kind of be unified and coherent under one common theme or idea, right? If you have a bunch of disjoint ideas that aren't really connected, it's kind of really hard to understand like what is the exact purpose, right? You kind of want to ask yourself, like, what are these killer features, right, that make your web app unique and viable and functional, right? Where you might also hear this term, I think this is for one of your later milestones, is this idea of a minimal viable product, right? And it's pretty commonly used across design, MVP for short. It really just indicates, what is the minimal set core features of our product that make it viable and functional on its own, right? And so when you're kind of coming up with your idea with your web app, you kind of want to list the ideas, and I'll show you a quick example on how to do it. And you want to isolate what are the core that are used just to focus on the viability of our web app, right? And from there, it'll help you kind of prioritize what work you need to get done in order to hit your milestone deadline. And lastly, right, as you're working on this, you're still iterating, right? So you might be asking yourself, how can you still make your website a little bit more interesting? So we'll look at the example that we're going from the, or just a separate example right now. So this idea of crowdsourcing bathroom passcodes, right? So what is this idea in a sentence? You can share bathroom passcodes from local cafes, right? But can we make this a little bit more interesting? Well, cafes have Wi-Fi, so can we expand this to say sharing Wi-Fi and bathroom passcodes from local cafes? And so what are some core features that we might want? You might be able to view a location for a cafe. You can search for locations. You might be able to submit a code that says, this is the code I last used. And then on the other side of it, you can see the codes for all the different cafes. You can endorse a code if it works. You can correct or update a code if it's invalid. And then you can also have this gamification system where you gain points for endorsing a code. And there's different links, right? So a lot of cool features in this web app. But when we're talking about minimal viable product, we really want to know, like, what are the core set of features, right? That really alone, that like we just want to see, does this product idea work, and is it viable, right? And so if you're trying to think about like, well, a gamification system can be added to almost anything, right? And it doesn't really make it's not the core of what our concept is, right? Where we share bathroom and passcode ideas, right? But what is might be something as like submitting a code for a location, or updating it, right? Or updating locations, right? And so you can isolate the certain set of features that represent your MVP and focus on building those first, right? And when you're building your website, even if your design is not fully fleshed, that's totally fine. The purpose is like, can you just get something functional that works, that we as staff or other users can test and see that it works, right? And throughout this process, right, when you're listing out your features and you're deploying, if you realize that something is too big and you don't have enough time, right, don't be afraid just to diverge from the original inspiration, right? The best ideas often inspire even better ones. So if you realize you have too much time and you want to reduce the scope, or if you realize you have more time, a little bit of extra time, and you might want to add something, right? Don't be afraid to kind of drift away. Obviously be mindful of your constraints, your time, the number of people on your team. But don't feel like you have to limit yourself now that we're starting to building our apps. And so we'll do one more example with what we were talking, the idea map earlier. Let's look at this example of Corgi Carnival. It's a virtual park for pets to tag up and meet with other pets. So what are some key features about them? Pet owners can create virtual pets with custom tags. Pets can meet other pets and become pet pals by exchanging tags. You can allow for group walks with other virtual pets. There might be a leaderboard for finding missing pets using a dog tag. You can make pet friends, and pet owners can give feedback on pet parks, right? So a lot of cool features of a virtual pet park that we have. And when we kind of isolate, like, well, what are the core features that make our web app, under this idea of a virtual pet park, right? You want to have your actual virtual pets working, and you can add custom tags to them. They can meet other pets and become pet pals. And then maybe you want to allow for group walks, right? This is something that, what else can these virtual pet owners do on your web app? They might be able to do virtual group walks, right? And so that's kind of when we're thinking about like isolating for an MVP. And so hopefully by the end of this process, you're able to deploy a working version of your website. Here we have a flying corgi dog. But yeah, that's pretty much all it. This is a great time to start brainstorming. Ideation is a really cool time. Don't feel like you have to limit yourself. And if you have any questions, definitely reach out to the staff. And if you ever concerned about the rules, you can check out the rules at weblab.to/rules. And with that, that is the end of it. I think Justin might be next. If you have any other questions, feel free to add them in the question doc. Yeah, thanks everyone.